But will they go back to the well? Will they ask for more now that their appetite has been whetted? I think that's totally possible. And it's a nice contrast with what they've asked for the Department of Justice, both in their subpoena to DOJ, but also in the Epstein Files Transparency Act, where they are calling for the Department of Justice to produce a much, much broader universe of everything in their possession that could relate to their prior investigations of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, of course, with some exceptions for victim privacy and personally identifiable information. But the requests to the estate, by contrast, are far more limited, and therefore what we can glean from it may also be more limited.
This was a huge dump of photos that we're just getting into. I mean, some 95,000 photos were reportedly turned over to the committee in recent days, Ken. And as we share some of those that we're seeing already, Lisa noted that the faces that are blacked out were done so by the Democrats on the Oversight Committee. The men in these pictures are high-powered, certainly very recognizable faces for a lot of our viewers. Most have acknowledged relationships with Epstein, but have denied anything inappropriate or criminal. And we should note that nothing that we've seen in these photos further any claims or evidence of wrongdoing at this point. What are we hearing so far in reaction from these men, Ken? And if not today, what have they said in the past?
Yeah, I'm not aware that they've reacted yet to the publication of these photos, but you just made the really important point. Look, we're seeing obviously very recognizable people here. There's Woody Allen, Steve Bannon. There are photos of Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton, Alan Dershowitz, who was a lawyer for Jeffrey Epstein. All of these men, well, first of all, we should be very upfront with the viewers. These photos so far it's not revealing anything new. We've long known that these men have had relationships with Epstein. They've all acknowledged that. And they've also said, as you pointed out, that they did nothing wrong, that they were not aware.
Breaking news on the Epstein files. House Oversight Democrats just dropped more pictures from the Epstein estate. Photos showing powerful men in Epstein's orbit, including President Trump and Bill Gates. And we're learning new details this hour that raise even more questions about who knew what and when. Plus, there's a new threat from the Trump administration against Venezuela after seizing an oil tanker, which could further escalate this entire dangerous situation. We've got a lot to cover, so let's dive in. Democrats on the House Oversight Committee just released a trove of new photos they received from the Epstein estate. The photos show powerful men who moved in Epstein's orbit. There's a photo of President Trump with unidentified women. There are others featuring former President Bill Clinton, Bill Gates, and Steve Bannon, along with Woody Allen, among others. House Oversight Democrats provided very limited information on the situation surrounding these photos or when they were even taken. And we need to be clear up front, none of the images by themselves are evidence of wrongdoing. By the way, I am trying to do my best to gather all the information I can for you and share it with you. Please leave your likes and comments, and I would be grateful if you subscribed. Let's continue. But let me tell you what we're actually looking at here, because the scope is massive. This is 19 images out of a batch of 95,000 that the Epstein estate provided to the House Oversight Committee. 95,000. Let that number sink in for a moment. These 19 photos are literally a drop in the bucket of what the committee is currently going through. The images include photographs showing President Donald Trump flanked by multiple women who have had their faces blurred to protect their privacy. We also see a picture signed by former President Bill Clinton with Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's co-conspirator. There are other powerful figures from Woody Allen to Steve Bannon, a close Trump ally who was previously a Wall Street executive. That's just an example of people appearing in this new release. Now, here's what's important to understand about the process. The committee got this new batch of documents this week pursuant to a subpoena from the estate, and they're going through these in real time. What we're lacking is any context on when these photos were taken or what conversations surrounded them, because these images stem from photos that were in Epstein's emails or on his computers. The subpoena specifically asked for all videos and still photographs from the Epstein estate. So there's an open question about whether the committee is going to amend or issue a new subpoena to try to get email context around these photos, because right now we don't know when they were sent, to whom they were sent, or even what was said about them. But we're getting a glimpse into Epstein's inner social circle and some of the powerful people with whom he aligned himself. And remember, we expect more, much more, because there are 95,000 of these documents and we've only seen 19. The Oversight Committee ranking member, that's Robert Garcia on the Democratic side, is expected to come out and address what's still coming. That's the next big question. We see this now, but what else is in those files? Legal analyst Lisa Rubin points out some crucial details about what stands out in these photos. First, look at whose faces are redacted versus whose aren't. The women have their faces blurred out or redacted. That suggests the estate and/or the committee believes some of these women are either minors or survivors of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Because there are other images, for example, one with Epstein, Maxwell, Bill Clinton, and an unidentified couple, where both the man and woman's faces are fully visible. That means they know who that person is, and that person is not someone they believe to be a survivor. On the other hand, we see that picture with President Trump and 6 women whose faces are all blurred. That's not to say Trump is complicit in any wrongdoing, Rubin emphasizes, but it may be that he was photographed with people the committee believes were trafficked or abused by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Think about what that implies. The protective redaction suggests these women may have been victims. Rubin also provides important context about the original subpoena. When the committee issued it in the first place, it was because they came to understand there was a birthday book based on Wall Street Journal reporting over the summer. Once they understood the estate possessed that birthday book, they crafted a subpoena. But that subpoena didn't ask carte blanche for every piece of paper the estate had that could possibly relate to abuse or trafficking. There were very specific requests for certain types of documents. The subpoena requested photographs and videos reflective of Jeffrey Epstein's properties that he either owned or operated, mostly his homes. And now we're seeing some images that appear to have been taken on private airplanes as well. Will they go back for more now that their appetite has been whetted? That's totally possible, according to Rubin. And there's a nice contrast with what they've asked from the Department of Justice, both in their subpoena to DOJ and in the Epstein Files Transparency Act. They're calling for DOJ to produce a much broader universe of everything in their possession that could relate to prior investigations of Epstein and Maxwell. With some exceptions for victim privacy and personally identifiable information, but the requests to the estate, by contrast, are far more limited. Therefore, what we can glean from these estate materials may also be more limited. Now let's talk about the men in these pictures. High-powered, very recognizable faces. Most have acknowledged relationships with Epstein, but have denied anything inappropriate or criminal. And we should be absolutely clear that nothing we've seen in these photos provides evidence of wrongdoing at this point. These are associations, not accusations. We're seeing Woody Allen, Steve Bannon, Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton, Alan Dershowitz, who was a lawyer for Epstein. All of these men have acknowledged knowing Epstein. They've all said they did nothing wrong and were not aware of his trafficking of young women. The photos don't contradict those statements, at least not based on what we can see in the images themselves. But here's where it gets interesting from a political perspective. Justice reporter Ken Delanian points out that Democrats and Republicans could have pressed the Biden Justice Department to release Epstein files earlier. They could have issued this subpoena a long time ago. They didn't. Democrats are doing this now because they sense that putting this information out puts pressure on Donald Trump. This story is a problem for Trump, and they're doing this in part for political reasons. Now, that's not necessarily wrong. Politics is part of congressional oversight, and we should remember the victims want all the evidence out there too. They've been calling for more transparency on what's in these files. So Democratic political interests and victim demands for transparency are aligned here. These pictures are coming from the Epstein estate, not from DOJ at this point, which is an important distinction. From an evidentiary standpoint, former federal prosecutor Barrett Bergerer makes crucial points about what we're actually looking at. For the public, this is an ongoing process where we're getting little pieces of information, not necessarily evidence. We can expect to get even more, especially once we get closer to that December 19th deadline for DOJ to release all its files. But we're getting these pieces of information with no context. This is also going to be the case when we get DOJ's files. You might see notes. You might see an FBI agent scribbling. You might see what's called a 302, which is a more formal FBI report. But there won't be a lot of context in some of these documents. So for people diving in and looking at these things, we're desperate to try to put pieces together, to make a narrative or tell a story. It may not be that easy because we're going to get a document dump. Photos, flight records, information from FBI agents. There won't necessarily be a comprehensive storyline tying it all together. Second, and this is really important, just because people were associated with Jeffrey Epstein, just because their pictures are there, just because we see their names in whatever DOJ releases, number one, doesn't mean they did anything criminal. Number two, doesn't mean there was ever a criminal case initiated or started against them. It's tempting to keep using the word evidence, but we actually have to catch ourselves on this. Evidence is what you use when you're trying to prove criminal charges. What we have here is information that won't necessarily ever be used in any court of law or to make any criminal case. It may just be there to satisfy public curiosity right now. Now, let me add some context that I think is crucial here. Yes, these photos by themselves don't prove wrongdoing. Yes, association with Epstein doesn't automatically mean participation in crimes. Yes, we need to be careful about jumping to conclusions. All of that is true and important to remember. But let's also be clear about what we're seeing. Jeffrey Epstein was a convicted sex offender who ran a sex trafficking operation involving minors for years. He cultivated relationships with powerful men and kept extensive documentation of those relationships. He had professional photographs taken and carefully preserved. He maintained detailed records in his computers and emails. Why? What was the purpose of all this documentation? Wealthy people have friends and associates. They take photos at parties and events, but Epstein's collection appears to go well beyond normal social documentation. The sheer volume, 95,000 images and documents, suggests someone obsessively cataloging his connections to power. Was it insurance? Was he creating a record to protect himself if anyone tried to expose him? Was it blackmail material to use if threatened? Was it proof of his access and influence to show other powerful people? Was it trophies celebrating the famous people in his orbit? Probably some combination of all those motives. And Trump appearing repeatedly in these materials, both in the current release and in previous document dumps, is significant, even if it doesn't prove criminal activity. Trump has claimed he barely knew Epstein, that they had a falling out, that he kicked Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago. But every time new evidence emerges, there's Trump, in photos, in flight logs, in statements by witnesses. The documented connection is extensive regardless of what Trump claims. Same with Bill Clinton. Same with Prince Andrew, who's been credibly accused by Virginia Giuffre. Same with others who appear repeatedly. The pattern of association matters even when we can't prove specific criminal acts from these photos alone. And the blurred faces of women in the Trump photo are particularly significant. Lisa Rubin pointed out that the decision to blur suggests these may be victims or minors. The committee and estate wouldn't blur faces without good reason. They're protecting people they believe were harmed, which means Trump was photographed with people who may have been trafficked or abused. Again, that doesn't prove Trump knew about abuse or participated in crimes, but it puts him in physical proximity to potential victims in Epstein's world. Combined with Trump's own history of sexual misconduct allegations, his comments about women, his friendship with Epstein during the period when trafficking was occurring, it creates a disturbing picture. Bill Gates has admitted his association with Epstein was a huge mistake and has said he regrets meeting with him. Steve Bannon's connection to Epstein hasn't been as thoroughly examined but deserves scrutiny. Woody Allen has his own history of accusations. Alan Dershowitz represented Epstein legally and has been accused by Virginia Giuffre. These aren't random people. These are men with power, wealth, and in several cases, troubling histories or accusations related to sexual misconduct. That's the circle Epstein cultivated. That's who appears in his meticulously documented collection. The December 19th deadline for DOJ to release files is going to be huge. That's when we'll potentially get FBI reports, investigation documents, witness statements, evidence from the actual criminal case. The estate materials are one thing, but DOJ materials could include information about what investigators knew, who they looked at, what charges they considered. And remember, Epstein didn't kill himself in a vacuum. His death in federal custody while awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges remains deeply suspicious. The Justice Department investigation into his activities and his co-conspirators didn't end with his death. They have files on who else was involved, who else they investigated, who else might have been charged if Epstein had lived to cooperate or face trial. Those files could contain information about Trump or Clinton or others that goes well beyond social photos. They could include statements from victims about who they encountered. They could include financial records showing payments. They could include communications that reveal what these men knew about Epstein's activities. The fact that we're only seeing 19 out of 95,000 images from the estate means there are thousands more photos coming. What's in those? More Trump? More Clinton? More powerful men we haven't seen yet? And if these 19 were selected for release, what did they leave out? What's still being reviewed that they deemed too sensitive or problematic to release immediately? Congressional oversight is supposed to work exactly like this, using subpoena power to compel production of evidence, going through materials methodically, protecting victim privacy while pursuing transparency, making information public so Americans can understand what happened, and yes, using the process to put political pressure on powerful people who might otherwise escape accountability. Democrats are absolutely using this to pressure Trump, but that doesn't make it wrong or inappropriate. Trump is president right now. He has enormous power. He controls DOJ, which could theoretically obstruct or slow walk releases. Congressional oversight provides a check on that power by compelling information directly from the estate and eventually from DOJ under the Epstein Files Transparency Act that Trump himself signed. The irony of Trump signing legislation that now forces release of information about his Epstein connections would be funny if the subject matter wasn't so serious. But that's where we are. Trump signed the bill thinking he could control the narrative or believing there's nothing damaging in the files, and now it's all coming out whether he likes it or not. Robert Garcia and the House Oversight Democrats are doing important work here. They're following the evidence where it leads. They're protecting victims while pursuing truth. They're making as much public as possible, and they're setting up for an even bigger release when DOJ materials come out. Victims have been demanding this transparency for years. They want everyone who enabled Epstein exposed. They want accountability for all the powerful men who looked the other way or participated in crimes. They deserve that accountability, and they deserve to see the full truth about what happened to them and who was involved. So yes, be cautious about jumping to conclusions from photos alone. Yes, remember that association doesn't prove criminality. Yes, wait for context and additional evidence before making final judgments. But also understand that we're watching a massive trove of materials emerge that documents Epstein's connections to some of the most powerful men in the world. 95,000 images, 19 released so far, thousands more coming. DOJ files arriving December 19th. This story is far from over. It's actually just beginning. And everyone who appears in those materials, everyone who socialized with Epstein, everyone who flew on his planes or visited his properties, they all owe the American people and the victims an explanation about what they knew and when they knew it. The truth is coming out, slowly, in pieces, through congressional subpoenas and mandated releases. But it's coming, and no amount of denials or claims of barely knowing Epstein will make the photographic and documentary evidence disappear. We're going to see who was really in Epstein's orbit. We're going to understand who enabled him, and we're going to demand accountability from everyone who was part of that world.